So good afternoon. As I mentioned, for those who are coming in, Rabbi Jacobs, I would say unfortunately is not here, but given that he's in Los Angeles and a little nicer weather than we have here.
He wanted to see this.
I know, we'll see, he picked he left on Sunday, so he's missed our cold weather here.
It's all right, we'll get to him.
I never missed it when I lived.
Yeah, but we have enough to go around.
Tonight, what's it?
Oh, I did. I was waiting for Rabbi Hell to respond. Yes, I did. I agree. I agree with you.
Nobody responded.
I did see it. I agree after this class. I did see it.
Who are the
I didn't
converts?
see it until you said it, but I did see it. Yeah.
Rabbi Josh,
Yes.
who converted? I mean, what did they convert from?
Oh, well, let's read. We're gonna look. You're jumping ahead here, but good.
Don't let.
Hopefully, it sounds like Rabbi Jacobs hasn't looked at this Midrash, or at least Ron is telling me he has.
We have not.
So what I want to look at, this is actually is a famous story in the Midrash that we'll read, or this is from the Talmud Shabbat 33b. And we come to learn in this story, we come to learn in this Midrash the story of Shimon Bar Yochai, who is a prominent rabbi, probably most notable as seen by Kabbalists and those who are kind of studiers of Kabbalah, as the founder of Kabbalah.
Yeah.
But I'll begin here, and then maybe there's others that want to read, but I'll read while everyone's eating. At the start of this Midrash, a number of rabbis of the Talmud are sitting together. Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Shimon were sitting, and Yehuda, the son of converts, and Sheila asked the question already before we started, what does this mean, the son of converts? We're going to see in a minute why that's relevant to the writers of the Talmud. Rabbi Yehuda opened and said, how pleasant are the actions of this nation, the Romans, as they established marketplaces, established bridges, established bathhouses. So here they are sitting there in the time that the Romans are ruling over what is, the land of Israel. And Rabbi Yehuda is actually praising all of these great things that the Romans have done. They've established all of these modern wonders, bridges, bathhouses, marketplaces. Rabbi Yossi doesn't say anything. He's silent. But then Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai says everything that they established for their own purposes. They established marketplaces only to place prostitutes in them, bathhouses to pamper themselves, and bridges so that they could collect taxes from all who pass over them. So I want to pause there for a minute and hear any thoughts. Here, there's two very different approaches to what the Romans have done. One is to praise all of these great modern innovations that the Romans have brought to the society. And then the latter to basically to say how horrible it is, all of these things they've done only for their own merit, only for their own gain. Yeah, Elliot.
Speaking about this, I have a modern day example.
Yep.
There are a lot of Christian groups that are supportive of Israel. And there are people who say, well, there's an agenda there. They're just waiting for the Jews to accept their Mashiach.
Great notes.
That's not going to happen for a long time.
So Elliot, and I'll just share a word, and I see Bob as his hand raised as well on Zoom. But you make a great point, and I'll share that I used to live in San Antonio, Texas. It is a beautiful community, but I lived very close to a very large evangelical church, Cornerstone Church, and the pastor John Hagee at this church is well known as being the founder of Christians United for Israel. And they were holding a night to honor Israel at the church when I lived there. And it was an interesting conundrum. I actually did go to see what this was all about. And interestingly, the Jewish Federation in San Antonio was very ambivalent about all of this because there is some ideology behind it that right, well, I don't know that all evangelical Christians know this ideology. The ideology is that one day, the return of Messiah, there's a different understanding of why evangelical Christianity is supportive of Israel than why we may be supportive of Israel. But the Houston Jewish Federation came in for these programs and was very supportive. And there were actually different approaches even among the Jewish communities in Texas to all of this, this support of Israel and whether, it was all positive, whether there was, whether there were ulterior motives and whether that mattered also. So it is an interesting point. And I'll tell you, the Jewish communities in the place where this was happening, where John Hagee lives, there were different approaches to how to approach that. But yeah, Bob.
So what it looks like to me is that you have one person who is looking at the advantages of change and the other one who is being uncomfortable by change. So that one is looking at the improvements and what can happen due to the change, and the other one doesn't like it and wanted to keep things the way they were.
Okay.
It's all about perception of change.
Okay. Yeah, Nina and Larry.
Just quickly,
Mhm.
the second Rabbi Shimon, in my mind, since there's not a lot of information here, he's either in disagreement with what they made or who made it.
Okay.
The fact that the Romans made.
Well, right, the Romans, and we can replace maybe for the purposes of this, it's the Romans, but idolaters or the conquering the enemy.
So in
Yeah.
this case, we don't have a ton of information. For me, it's either one or both.
Okay, Larry, did you want to?
Yeah, that's kind of what I was gonna say, kind of relating back to the Hagee, it's not just perception, but the ulterior motives of who, where, going back a little bit further, the second one may say, or the first one may say, yes, it's an improvement, that's all she sees. Where the second one may think, yes, it's an improvement, the idea that they're even here, that they're conquering, and not allowing us to live as Jews, taking our rights away, that overrides anything that may be on the positive.
Okay. Good. Now, and I actually think, and I hear parallels also when I hear the story to Hanukkah, that we often talk about Hanukkah as kind of a battle of the Maccabees, the Jews against the Greeks. But in many ways, the historical story of Hanukkah is the Maccabees fighting back against Hellenist Jews who liked, the Greek innovations and were maybe too ready to throw out their traditions and their own history in favor of what they saw as the new modern world, the Greek world. But in many ways, right, maybe there's a balance that could be reached here between it being all good or all bad. And Nina, you actually mentioned that this is the second voice. He's the third rabbi. I wanted to hear if anyone had any thoughts. There's one rabbi who's completely silent. Rabbi Yosei, we skipped because he doesn't say anything, but by not saying anything, maybe he's also, espousing a viewpoint by being silent in this conversation. I wanted to turn if there's any thoughts on what it might mean to stay silent here. Yeah, Sheila.
Yeah, especially when you're talking about what Yehuda, the son of converts, went ahead and did. In other words, you shut your mouth and you just grin and bear it because otherwise you're looking for trouble. And that's exactly, I think the question is not what the rabbis did, but now Yehuda doesn't understand that you don't go ahead and tell your parents and tell everybody. Not if you're
Okay.
in other words, I mean, this is, you know what, it reminds me of what Bernie Sanders is going ahead and doing now with Israel. I mean, shut your damn
Okay,
mouth.
well, I don't want to jump, but okay, thank you. But no, what Sheila's moving forward here, and what happens, and this is actually why the story mentions, there's there's actually two Yehudas in the story. There's Rabbi Yehuda, and then there's a second Yehuda who the story tells us is the son of converts. That's only relevant in the story's eyes because this Yehuda is reporting back to his family and his extended family that's not Jewish, that are Romans, what happened. There's no indication that he's telling it with any evil intent or malicious intent. But if I jump down here, Yehuda, the son of converts, went and related their statements to his household. And those statements continued to spread until they were heard by the monarchy. So the only reason they're mentioning that Yehuda has a family that's not entirely Jewish is because he shares the story of who he was with, and that one person Rabbi Yehuda praised the Romans, and Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai condemned the Romans essentially, or all the Romans did. And the monarchy heard that this Shimon Bar Yochai is a rabbi who's saying that what they're doing is evil and wrong and all only for their own gain. And ultimately they ruled and they said, Yehuda, who elevated the Roman regime shall be elevated because Yehuda spoke praise of what the Romans did. He should be praised, and he should be appointed as the head of the sages. Yosei remained silent. He didn't say anything. He didn't speak up in our favor. He shall be exiled from his home and sent to Tzipori. But Shimon Bar Yochai, who denounced the government, he shall be killed. And so what did Shimon Bar Yochai do? He went with his son, Rabbi Elazar. They went and hid in the study hall. Every day, Rabbi Shimon's wife would bring them bread and a jug of water, and they would eat. But then the decree intensified, and Shimon says to his son, women are easily impressionable. This is not PC, but this is from the Talmud.
It's BCE.
Right, BC, not quite BCE, but close. But there's room for concern lest the authorities torture her and she reveal our whereabouts. They then went and hid in a cave. A miracle occurred. This is my small connection to Tu B'Shvat, because there's a miraculous tree in this story. A carob tree was created for them, as well as a spring of water, so that they could live in this cave and be hidden from sight. And what did they do? They would remove their clothes and sit covered in sand up to their necks and study Torah all day in that manner. At the time of prayer, they would dress, cover themselves, and pray, and they would again remove their clothes so they wouldn't be tattered and put on their garments. And they sat in the cave for 12 years. So maybe you've heard this story, maybe this was discussed. According to tradition, during these 12 years, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai and his son Rabbi Elazar sat and studied Torah and really came up with many mystical connections. According to Jewish traditions, they wrote the Zohar, the classical work of Kabbalah, during these 12 years. And that is, really a story of complete separation, of complete removal from society. Here, all society was out to do, all the Romans were out to do was for their own gain. They completely removed themselves here, initially in fear of being killed. And what happens? Elijah, the prophet, came and stood at the entrance to the cave and said, "Who will inform Bar Yochai that the emperor died and his decree has been abrogated?" So finally, they're emerging from the cave. They saw people who were plowing and sowing. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai said, "These people abandon eternal life of Torah study and engage in temporal life for their own sustenance." The Gemara relates that every place that Shimon and his son Rabbi Elazar directed their eyes was immediately burned. So I want to stop here. What's happening? Why are they so upset at this farmer that's plowing and sowing? Any thoughts?
Because he is continuing living there and therefore enjoying everything that the Romans built.
Okay.
He
So
is he's ignoring the what's bad about what they built, about what what's his name, Shimon said. Shimon said, yeah, it's all for their gain, and this guy is ignoring it. So it's for their gain. It's still for my gain.
Okay, right. It's for their own personal gain. Right.
They're not
But
studying.
he's
What?
They're
revengeful.
not studying, isn't it?
Right.
Right. They're not studying. Yeah, Helena?
He's revengeful. It's not right to burn something that is being done working.
You're saying what Shimon Bar Yochai is doing is not right.
It's revengeful. It's
Right, there's vengeance, right? And I don't know whether we're meant to take the story literally or not. That's a separate question.
It's Midrash, it's never taken.
Well, it's Midrash, it depends on how you view Midrash. And Helena, we'll get back to your point. I see Bob has your hand, and then I'll share some thoughts. Yeah, Bob, yeah.
Aren't they in violation of several of the rules of the Talmud? Man should not live alone. In the Ketubah, man is supposed to provide relations with his wife. And you're not supposed to study only. You're supposed to live.
Well, interesting, but there's a debate early on, and what you're sharing is what comes out kind of as the winner of the debate, let's say. But this story shows that there was some debate about what the proper, perhaps there's some debate about what we should be doing with our lives. But yeah, Nelson.
Yeah.
Well, but in the same way, the farmer they don't know he's not studying. He's not studying at that moment, but he's engaging in a proper activity. And they're
Right, we
believing
don't
him, judging what they don't see.
Right, we don't know. That is true. Alina?
and Torah.
Right, okay. Imein Kamach Ein Torah, we read. So this here, Shimon Bar Yochai is so removed. For 12 years, he's been completely removed. He already showed disdain for Roman inventions, but he's so far removed from doing anything except for Torah study that in his mind, his position is the only thing we should be doing is Torah. How dare this farmer be involved in something for his own personal gain? All you should be doing is studying.
But of all things, the farmer ain't Hema, ain't Torah.
Mhm.
So
Right.
without what to eat, there's not any Torah. They're linked together.
Right.
So, of all things.
So here it's not some Roman aristocrat. It's a farmer, a very basic person just providing that sustenance. And we say, Imein Kamach Ein Torah. If there's not flour, if there's not sustenance, how can there be Torah? And interestingly, that's how the story, right? A divine voice emerged and said to them, did you emerge from the cave in order to destroy my world? Go back to the cave, right? This is a godly voice, a divine voice saying, the purpose of life is not simply to study Torah. Interestingly, though, and one of the reasons Shimon Bar Yochai is seen as the founder of Kabbalah takes everything in the world and makes it Torah, makes it God, essentially, is everything is some emanation of the divine. And in many ways, turning everything into Torah. So here, Shimon Bar Yochai is rebuked by this heavenly voice that maybe study is not the only thing. Right, Sheila?
Well, this is so relevant today, and it's interesting because in Israel, we always say those in Meir Sharim, the men are so busy studying, they don't do anything for the country. And this time around, some of them have realized, hey, if we want our country and we want to be able to study, we better go help out.
Right. No, well, thank you, Sheila, but it's not unheard of today. And this is not the way we practice Judaism, but right, if you do go to places like Mea Sharim, you will find people that study all day. And in fact,
in Brooklyn.
Right, Brooklyn. I was over winter break here, over New Year's. I was in Panama, which is actually, you may not be aware, has a thriving traditional Jewish community, largely a Sephardic community of Jews that have come there from Syria. And they have a very large kollel. In fact, we do here in Cleveland too. But they have a very large kollel with people that are studying all day. Well, Wycliffe has as well, has Tel Ziv, Tel Yeshiva, but right here on Green Road, very close to here, you have a kollel. It's
Wasn't there, two of the tribes, one studied and one worked? They supported.
there's Midrash to that effect. Yeah, but it's not unheard of. There are Jewish communities today where the ideal, what's seen as the ideal, is to be able to sit and study all day long.
And how are they self-sustaining them?
Well, they're right. That's the question. How does it,
I know, not all of them.
how can you be sustaining? Maybe there's a spouse that supports, maybe the community supports. But the divine voice here seems to reject that. That's the only, it certainly is rejecting this is the only way to do business. We don't know whether
the
it's.
same thing with the monks. The monks go in a monastery and they don't have many needs. They really survive
No, they make wine.
on contributions, but some of them are smart
And they
enough
make wine.
and they sell. They make things like bread and jellies, which they sell.
Okay, good, right. So it's not only in Jewish tradition that there's this dichotomy, yeah.
And don't we do this with the kids, the Dalai Lama, the Buddhist kids? They spend, I think until a certain age studying and being devoted, and then because when
There may be, I'm not sure what the practice
when they
is.
had the cave incident, when the kids came out, they said at a certain point they were going to go and devote themselves to
Okay,
religion. And then but that it was not a permanent thing. They would then rejoin the world.
they would rejoin. Okay, no, interesting.
And they
So
survive
jumping
on
back
tourism.
here.
They survive
So-
on tourism. It's interesting.
Okay, well, okay.
Yeah, seriously.
No, but so interestingly, right, the divine voice clearly is rejecting that study all day is the only appropriate way, but the divine voice isn't rejecting that studying all day is problematic. And in fact, there are Jewish communities, right, that is still seen as an ideal. But here, return to your cave. They went and sat for 12 months. They said the judgment of the wicked in Gehenna lasts for 12 months. So surely their sin was atoned in that time. So they knew that they were atoning for sin, or this was a consequence of their actions. So the divine voice emerges and says, emerge from your cave. They emerged, and now they would be okay, because anywhere Rabbi Elazar would strike, his father, Rabbi Shimon, would heal to make sure that nothing was harmed in the world on account of people doing things for their own gain. Rabbi Shimon said to Rabbi Elazar, my son, you and I would suffice for the entire world, as the two of us are engaged in the proper study of Torah.
Okay.
So what is he saying? Okay, it's okay that others are doing things for their own gain, because the two of us are sustaining the entire world through our Torah study. So they're not saying im ein kamach ein Torah, they're saying we're studying all the time, and that allows the world to exist.
Not egotistic at all.
Not either, right. Because we're doing it on behalf of everyone can exist, yeah.
It's like a comment in the very beginning, we were talking about Rome.
Yes.
You're talking about you create things for selfishness. Well, guess what? That's what capitalism is all about.
Well, yeah.
The idea of making profit. So it's
Good, so.
component, but there's a beneficial component. I just
Right.
wanted this.
No, well, so 100%. And that's actually what I think Rabbi Yehuda is saying at the beginning. Capitalism didn't necessarily exist in the same way. I mean, they didn't think about it in the same way in those times as we think about it today. But I think when Rabbi Yehuda is praising the bridges and the marketplaces, he's praising all of the positive benefits that those things bring.
But there's a selfish
Right.
motive.
Oh, and there's a selfish motive,
Right.
but I think both Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai agree here. There's a selfish motive, but Rabbi Yehuda is praising these things because of the good they bring the world. And Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai is condemning these things because he feels, oh, they're only for that gain. And he doesn't recognize, he's
Yes.
unwilling to recognize
Yeah.
the positive contribution. Yeah.
What I don't hear is what would seem to be the ideal, which is to take those advances and incorporate them into what you believe is the right way of living, rather than making it an either or thing, making it part of what you do, but with your spin on it.
Okay, no, interesting,
Yeah.
right. And maybe that's the middle ground, and maybe that's Rabbi Yosei who's silent, doesn't want to get involved. Maybe it's yes and, maybe they're both correct. Yeah,
But is it possible that the judgment of the wicked, which lasts 12 months, was the rabbis, not the people?
Rabbi, can you repeat? We don't know.
yeah, sorry, you asked why, the judgment of the wicked lasts for 12 months. So it's interesting. I actually read this. Oh, they went and sat there for 12
They
months.
went back to the cave for 12 months.
Yeah, I'm reading
Like they were the ones that,
I'm reading it that they were the ones who were punished for their actions of killing this farmer.
but they thought,
Maybe they thought, and I'm not sure, I would need to look at the commentary. Maybe they thought maybe they thought the others were the ones being punished. I read it as them being punished for their actions, the same way that you are. Yeah, Ron.
Is this 12 months the same Midrash that we used to say Kaddish for a year? And then only do 11 months because nobody.
So it's connected, it's part of the same Midrash.
For this Midrash?
It is part of the same Midrash, yeah, this idea, and there might be other Midrashim, but it's the same idea, the same concept, that we don't believe. So Gehenna is the kind of the Hebrew term for hell, essentially, but it's Gehinnom. It was a valley. It's actually still outside in Jerusalem, Gei Ben Hinnom, which literally is the valley of Ben Hinnom. In the Torah, it's talked about in that valley that the children were given up as sacrifice to one of the foreign gods, Molech. And that place was seen as the most evil, wicked took place in this valley because people were sacrificing their own children to the gods. And that term Gehinnom or Gehenna became known as essentially hell in Jewish tradition. Because of the actions of the idolaters who lived in that place thousands of years ago in the Torah. And the Midrash says that no one after, we believe about that people go into a world to come, but the wicked might go to this godless place, this Gehinnom. And the Midrash says that no person is so wicked that they would last longer than 12 months. Their punishment can't be longer than 12 months. The Midrash for saying Kaddish for a parent or for a loved one goes on further to say that no person would be so wicked that they would need to even be there the full 12 months. And so we say Kaddish for 11 months for a parent. And that's still the practice today. And it's based on this Midrash that originally it would have been a year, but no person would have been so wicked that they would still be in that place. And we're actually symbolically saying Kaddish to elevate the soul of the person who has passed away, the parent who has passed away, into Olam Haba. And so the goal of the Kaddish, if you've ever looked at the words of the Kaddish, it doesn't mention anything about the person who's passed away. It's all about praising God.
Doesn't say anything about death, period.
It doesn't say anything about death, period. You're right. But it's praising God that God might elevate the soul of our loved one, of our parent, into Olam Haba, into the world to come. And we do it for 11 months for a parent in lieu of the year, which is also said part of the Midrash, that no one would be so wicked that they would need the full 12 months to be elevated into the world to come.
And then the other thing I want to say about Rabbi Yossi, who was in the middle.
Rabbi Yosei, who's in the middle,
He didn't say anything, but he wasn't given a chance after he heard both sides to say what he felt. He was just
Maybe.
He was sent off to Zippori.
He was sent off.
What's so bad about being exiled to Zippori?
Right. It wasn't. Well, Zippori ends up being the heart of the rabbinic world in the early.
That's what I'm saying.
In the Talmudic era.
What was so bad?
So maybe it's not so bad. But good. We don't know too much about Yosei from this story.
In other words, it was really a punishment because the Romans were insulted, that he didn't defend them.
Right, the Romans are giving a consequence.
Yeah.
Now, that is true.
Well, obviously, you don't care about what we have done to the world. So go back to Tzipori, and you'll get to appreciate what we've done for the world.
Okay, no, thank you. Yeah. So I want to move on here with the story, and we kind of see Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Elazar start to recognize that they find something that is worthwhile in the rest of the world here. They move a little away from their thought that we're sustaining the world through our Torah study, and so that everyone else can do things for their own gain. And thank you for your comment. I think it's very true. And I think this is what Rabbi Yehuda is getting at, and we'll come to at the end, that yes, things can be for your own gain, but also still be beneficial for the world. And how we find ways to bring that in, Jerry, I think that's going to be an important point that we come to. But what do Shimon Bar Yochai and Rabbi Elazar see? Right as they come out of the cave a second time, the sun was setting. It's about to be Shabbat. Here I'm reading, as the sun was setting on Shabbat Eve, they saw an elderly man who was holding 2 bundles of myrtle branches and running at twilight. Scholarly understanding, these myrtle branches are akin to having like a bouquet of flowers today. These myrtle branches were a way to decorate the table, to kind of make the table beautiful for Shabbat. So he's running to get ready. He's running to prepare for Shabbat here on the eve of the Sabbath. And they ask, why do you have these? Why would you be taking them? And he says, in honor of Shabbat. And they said to him, let one suffice. They're so involved in their study that you have 2, one can be for Shabbat, the other must be for your own personal gain, for your own benefit of smelling the beauty or seeing the beauty of this myrtle. And what did the person answer? He answered them. One is corresponding to remember, keep the Shabbat day, and one is corresponding to observe the Shabbat day. And then what's happening here? We actually see there's the 10 commandments appear twice in the Torah. As you might know, they're not identical. In fact, the commandment to observe Shabbat, in one version of the 10 commandments appearing in Exodus, we see these words, remember the Shabbat and keep it holy. Sorry about that. Zachor et Yom HaShabbat. And in Deuteronomy, the 10 commandments appears again. And what does it say? Observe the Shabbat day, Shamor et Yom HaShabbat, and keep it holy. So the wording is slightly different. In fact, this is the reason we light 2 Shabbat candles on Friday night, is that we actually have 2 commandments regarding Shabbat. One is to remember the Sabbath, and the other is to observe the Sabbath, Shamor v'Zachor. In fact, we say that in Lech Arodi, Shamor v'Zachor b'dibur echad, means remember and observe and guard Shabbat in one word. And so 2 myrtle branches are not superfluous. Nothing is for this person's own gain. They're both in honor of Shabbat. And what does Rabbi Shimon say to his son Elazar? See how beloved the mitzvot are to Israel, and their minds were put at ease, and they were no longer so upset that people were not engaged in Torah study. And we can read not engaged in Torah study 24/7. Right, we can.
No, they were not engaged in Torah study, but what they were doing is they were engaged in keeping the mitzvot.
Right. So exactly.
Words,
so
if you're in Torah study, when do you have time to do half your mitzvot to, help other people and work in a soup kitchen and things like that?
Right. So, well, there's a debate. It's not here. I don't know if you've looked at this with Rabbi Jacobs or maybe in the future. There's a debate which is more important, study or action. And ultimately, there's a debate. One rabbi says the study is more important because how do you know what to do if you're not studying? And one says that action is more important because what does the study matter if there's no action? But the winning position is actually in the middle. It's study. Well, the winning position is study, but study when it leads to action. Right. And that's also debated in the Talmud. But here, right, Shimon Bar Yochai, and it doesn't change the fact, and to this point, it's not refuted. The idea of study all day is not refuted entirely in Jewish texts, and that's why we still have Jewish communities today where people are engaged in study essentially 24/7. But Shimon Bar Yochai is put at ease here because he recognizes that even these people that are doing things for their own benefit, and when I say their own benefit, this farmer is simply making food to eat, right? For their own benefit is very loose here. It's really anything that's not Torah study. But he is put at ease because he sees that even though they're not studying 24/7, they are acting out the mitzvot. They're acting out what the Torah is telling us to do. Yeah, Helena.
Something. During the past 2,000 years, even the Rabbanim had a profession. It's not that they were sitting 24 hours doing nothing, okay, just studying. Okay?
Right.
So they were doing things. You couldn't live without Shema.
That's what.
Right. No, so 100%. And the rabbis of the Talmud as well. The rabbis of the Talmud were other professions. In fact, there wasn't a means to earn a living in their time solely by being a rabbi, by writing. And it's discussed.
The modern ultra-Orthodox, they took it to such an extreme that they are really mooching on everybody else.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, this is actually one of the big debates and challenges in Israel today.
And it's a
Yes.
big cause for machloket and for
Right.
being active, which is always bad.
Right. And this story, I want to say, and whether you read this as literal or metaphor or story, the end point of the story, at least as far as we've come here, is that Torah study all the time maybe it's something you can do, as Shimon Bar Yochai says, but it's certainly not the end point is that you should be engaged in other things, at least the way that I read it.
Every extremity, like too much to the right, too much to the left, is not healthy and not good. Causes a lot of machloket and a lot of sinat achim.
Right. Well, no, thank you. So we're going to actually look, and this is connected here. If you move to the second, I think we're on the last page here. It's Brachot 35b, and it's here on the screen here. The sages taught, what is it? Right. What is the meaning of that which the verse states? And you shall gather your grain. This is in the Torah. Lo yamush sefer haTorah mipicha. Oh, sorry. Ve'asafta deganecha. Right. What does it mean? Because it's also stated, this Torah shall not depart from your mouths. Meaning, right, you shall contemplate it day and night. This is in Joshua. So how can we gather grain if all we're supposed to be doing, according to the book of Joshua, is Torah? And Torah should be on your lips day and night.
It's gathering the grain properly and leaving the corners and leaving the stuff you dropped. I mean, you just have to, is doing it the right way.
Okay, so right. So what does the Talmud say? Right. One might have thought that what Joshua says, these matters should be understood exactly as they're written. Literally, spend your days immersed exclusively in Torah study. However, that's the reason that the verse in the Torah says you shall gather your grains, your wine, your oil, because you should assume in their regard the way of the world. You need to set aside time not only for Torah, but also for work. And this is Im Ein Kamach Ein Torah, right? This is the statement of Rabbi Yishmael. But now Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai appears again. He seems to contradict and not like the idea of Ein Kamach Ein Torah. He doesn't like the idea that you should be doing anything other than Torah study. Is it possible that a person plows in the plowing season and sows in the sowing season and harvests in the harvest season and threshes in the threshing season and winnows in the windy season? As grain is separated from the chaff by means of the wind and is constantly busy, what will become of Torah? If you're always busy doing these other things for sustenance, Torah is going to disappear. Right. So rather, one must dedicate himself exclusively to Torah at the expense of other endeavors. As when Israel performs God's will, their work is performed by others. As it is stated, and strangers will stand and feed your flocks, and foreigners will be your plowmen and your vine dressers. This is from Isaiah. So yeah, Nelson has some thoughts here. Yeah. Nelson, it's muted. Is it frozen?
He had a wife who took care of him.
Do you see it?
He, you know, I
Sorry?
mean, he could do it because his wife took care of him. She brought him water and bread and fed him and did all that stuff.
So interesting. And after that, when he went to the cave, remember there was this magic, there was this miraculous carob tree and well and fresh water that appeared. So Shimon Bar Yochai was able to do it for 12 years by way of a miracle, right? So it's interesting, right? Shimon Bar Yochai comes to push back on this idea of Imein Kamach and Torah. Yeah, you know.
Am I interpreting correctly when Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai says, wait, will be performed by others, meaning not Jewish, because strangers will stand.
Yeah, I read it the same way.
So
Yeah.
that's what he says.
I would read it.
Study Torah and
Right.
let the rest of the world do what
Right, that's what it appears. That's to me what he appears to be saying. Yes.
A good thing?
Well, no, we're going to push back on this, but this is what Shimon Bar Yochai seems to be saying. Right? Maybe spouses as well, but I mean, this is a time where it was the men that were engaged in Torah study, so maybe he's also that's one other way to read it is maybe, but right. So when Israel does not perform, Bob, do you want to say something and then we'll continue? Yeah.
Aren't there some activities that must be performed by Jews? Like circumcision and making matzah?
And wine.
So yes, all of these are, so right, so that is true. There are certain things that according to tradition, right, need to be performed by Jews. The things you mentioned are all acts in service of the mitzvot, right? Being a Torah scribe, for instance, as well. That could be a challenge that you would pose to Shimon Bar Yochai. Now, wait a minute, Shimon Bar Yochai, what about even these things that need to be done by Jews? So that's something you could push back on Shimon Bar Yochai. Yeah, right.
Let the women and children do it.
Right. Maybe that's what Shimon Bar Yochai would say. I don't know. I can't speak to what Shimon Bar Yochai would say. And we'll talk about, there's still a dichotomy as today. This isn't a resolved issue, although we kind of certainly don't follow Shimon Bar Yochai here, as Helena mentioned, right? In Israel, there are, not only in Israel, in Cleveland as well, but not all Jews.
Right.
There are Shimon Bar Yochai has his following.
Right.
I believe in everything in moderation. So a little bit of Torah study, a little bit of work, and the rest of the time's for yourself.
Well, okay. Yeah, sorry.
If I understand correctly, I thought that in the 19th century and the early 20th century, when the Jews were in Europe, primarily, that it was a great honor to have a daughter that also marry a yeshiva.
Yeah.
And the wife, and there would be a dowry, and the wife would work, take care of the house, have the children, do everything literally, so that her husband could pray and study continuously. And it was a great honor, and it was looked upon in the village, in the shtetl, or whatever the case may be. It's really a wonderful life to live that was looked upon very, very highly.
Yeah, no, and 100%. Study is looked on as kind of the highest ideal. And Shimon Bar Yochai represents that to an extreme. Right. I mean, not that we want to take Torah study from Fiddler on the Roof, but what does Tavia say? If I were a rich man, I would sit and study all day, right? So this is
Have a seat by the Eastern Wall.
right. Yeah, right. But no, study is a high ideal, and we encourage study. We don't encourage study to the exclusion of everything else. And even sitting and studying all day, there's a debate, right? If I have the means to be able to study and not do anything else, that's one thing. But how do you have the means to do everything else? That's not really realistic for most people. But but the Torah, this verse is pushing back. Why was it saying to gather grain? Is it possible for everyone to do that? It's not here where it's the Torah right now. This Talmud is saying, right, this piece in the Talmud is saying, how do we understand you shall gather your grain if the book of Joshua says we should study all day and night? And Shimon Bar Yochai actually says, yes, we should study all day and night. The other position here is no, there's a time for studying and there's a time for doing other things.
You have the same
yeah.
thing with musicians.
Right.
There are musicians who spend their whole
Oh.
time playing. I think that
Okay, yeah.
like Bach and people like that, they condescended to give a concert once in a while because somebody was paying them.
Okay.
So they had to do it.
Yeah.
If you're
good.
They
studying,
didn't work.
if you're studying all day, how does that jive with the concept of tikkun olam? Because you're studying.
Right. So good. So studying all day, and this is actually why my concern was, if you have the means to be able to study and not have a job to earn money, that's, I don't see a problem with that. But the one thing that I do think, and this is where another piece in the Talmud says, study is the most important when it leads to action, that it can't be study without acting out the mitzvot in the Torah. So study when it leads to tikkun olam, when it leads to the performance of the mitzvot, is the highest ideal. Most people in the world are not able to study exclusively without having some other work. There's nothing that's seen as a high ideal in throughout Jewish history has been seen as a high ideal. But study when it leads to action. Yeah.
Well, we have in the Bible, we have Boaz. He doesn't do his own gathering. He has people who work for him to do the gathering.
Okay.
And they're instructed not to glean from the corners.
Right. They're instructed to follow the Torah's command. Yeah.
But what strikes me is after 12 years of study and nothing else, someone had to explain to him the significance of two bunches of myrtle. And that he, when they explained it again, yeah, right.
Well, interesting. So they
Study alone.
So this is where we're coming to, and I know we're getting close to one, so I'll share. So it's not necessarily that they didn't know. We don't know from the story. Their first thought wasn't to think about why two pieces of myrtle. Once they were once the person explained why they were using the two pieces of myrtle, then they said, "Oh, this is praiseworthy." But before they were thinking about it in that light, they were thinking, "Oh, they were bringing this myrtle to have a pleasant smell in their house," and that's not Torah study in their eyes.
Yeah.
In their eyes, they're doing it for their own temporal gain, for something that they derive benefit of.
Was this before polygamy was outlawed?
Well,
Because
probably yes, but how is that relevant?
Because one bunch of myrtle for each wife.
Oh, okay. Well,
Polygamy was outlawed in about 1200.
Well, officially yeah. So I want to take a second. They're so far, but you have a good point. They're so far. Shimon Bar Yochai and his son Elazar are so far removed. They're so engaged in Torah study that they can't even imagine what even the smallest act of sustenance of something that's not Torah study can be acceptable. They can't even fathom how having a branch of myrtle, like a bouquet of flowers, could be acceptable, or a farmer just plowing his land could be acceptable. On the other hand, we have Rabbi Yehuda, who's seeing all of these Roman innovations and simply praising them without thinking about the fact that maybe there's idolatry or didn't have all the best intent. But I want to.
They weren't studying.
Sorry?
Or maybe it was because they weren't studying. All they were doing is working.
All they were doing, Rabbi Yehuda was praising a society that was only working and not studying. Okay, good. This man who was holding the two myrtle leaves, though, presents, I think, the balance that we want to all hold. He clearly cares about the mitzvot. He clearly cares about the Torah study. He's doing this. He's bringing these leaves to represent Shabbat, to represent both Zachor, remembering Shabbat, and observing Shabbat. He clearly understands the Torah to some extent, right? But he also, wants to take what he has learned in the Torah and add it to his own practice of Shabbat. The world isn't bifurcated. It's not only work or only study, right? Ultimately, we need, even in those examples where, right, Tevye might want to study all day, it can't be only study without anything else. Or to push back on Rabbi Yehuda, it can't be only work without study. This man really, I think, represents for us the ground that we all want to walk in. And it's done right at a moment of, at a liminal moment, a moment of transition, right at the end of the work week and the beginning of Shabbat. It's kind of right before Shabbat comes in. This twilight is a moment of transition. And the old man is bringing that beauty and fragrance of the material world into Shabbat. In our world, we divide the world by time in Jewish tradition. There's the 6 days of the work week, or 5 days in our in the US, but there's the work week and then there's the holy. And essentially, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai spends 12 years in Shabbat. Because we think of Shabbat as a time set aside for study. But there's a reason that Shabbat is only 1 day of the week. And that the rest of the week is set aside for work, is set aside for personal gain, is set aside for doing things that make an impact in the world. And Shabbat is set aside for rest, for study. And I think bringing this fragrance from the week into Shabbat is really kind of the ultimate model that we want to strive for. Shimon Bar Yochai presents an extreme model where he spends 12 years that are all Shabbat. And perhaps you could read Rabbi Yehuda as saying all of these things are only glorifying the work without, recognizing that the Romans don't maybe take that time for Shabbat for study. But maybe through this person, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai finally understands what Jewish practice is, that it's not only study, but it's study with action. And ultimately, that's kind of where we end up here. And we have Imein Kamachein Torah. I think here, this is also from Pirkei Avot. I'll just finish. Rabban Gamliel, the son of Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, says, excellent is the study of Torah when combined with a worldly occupation. For toil in them both keeps sin out of one's mind. But study of the Torah, which is not combined with a worldly occupation, in the end comes to be neglected and becomes the cause of sin. And this message here is kind of that coming together.
It doesn't say the opposite.
And it doesn't, and I don't know that he's necessarily saying you need to have a profession where you earn money, but you need to do something outside of only studying Torah 24/7 to keep your mind occupied. Maybe that's action of the mitzvot. Maybe that's working as a lawyer or an accountant or a doctor or a business person or in any field. As many of the rabbis in the Talmud and the Mishnah did. But he comes, they come to this position where Torah study is, of course, critical and very important. But if it's done exclusively without anything else, then what are we, right? It leads to sin.
Wouldn't you say the contrast and the boundaries, the separation enable us to appreciate that which we should appreciate even more?
I love that, yes.
If we would eat steak, for me, I don't eat meat, but steak lovers eat filet mignon every day or kosher version of that. We appreciate it as much.
Okay, yeah, no, and it's that there's an argument. It's a great point. If you're studying 24/7, you might lose appreciation for that which you're doing.
Or Shabbos.
Well,
internal.
if you did Shabbat, if Shabbat was every day, right, you would lose the appreciation for Shabbat. Right.
Oh,
yeah.
For those that study all day, on Shabbat, you're supposed to separate and you're supposed to rest. But if they continue to study on Shabbos, they're not separating.
They're not separate. So, right. So even there, I believe, and I think there's a general, we should do something to set aside Shabbat from the rest of the day.
of Shabbat 24/7. The reason is you would never have Kabbalah and Havdalah, which to me are the most beautiful parts of the day.
You would miss the beginning and end of it was
You would never
24.
have a beginning or an end.
No, that's true. And in some ways, Shimon Bar Yochai being in this cave and studying is essentially in his Shabbat and to an extreme that he loses sight of the beauty of Torah with Kemach, of Torah with worldly pursuits.
And he's selfish.
Right. Well, so this is kind of my final message, but it is true. You know, Shimon Bar Yochai has a large following. In fact, you may know that Shimon Bar Yochai is buried on Har Meron, on Mount Meron, where on Lag BaOmer every year there is a pilgrimage of hundreds of thousands of primarily ultra-Orthodox followers of Kabbalah. Of course, there was a major tragedy a few years ago there where dozens were killed because I was there once. There's hundreds of thousands of people all trying to get to the exact same spot to his grave. And you get caught up in a place where you simply just can't move. You're pushed by the flow of the crowd. And while a horrible tragedy, I remember thinking, and this was 10 years before, I was there, I think 2005. So it was long before this tragedy. But I remember thinking to myself, this is a horrible accident waiting to happen because of how, the scene.
That's also a point. That's also a point. They're so busy with studying that they don't pay attention to.
Well, okay. I don't want to blame, it was a horrible tragedy, but
that's the same thing. But that is the case. You have this in Brooklyn, where you have fires in the house because they're worried. They're more worried about keeping Shabbos than they are about the safety of the kids.
Or the ultra-Orthodox who used to bring the kids sick, they would wait until the Motzei Shabbat, and the child was dying by the time they brought him to the emergency room.
That's a different question according to our understanding, Shabbat, Pikuach Nefesh takes precedence over everything. But right, and I don't have don't want to say any particular instance, but we believe, right. And I think sometimes there are certain groups within the Jewish community that may not understand this the same way we do, but we definitely believe that Torah can only flourish when it's together with a worldly pursuit. And that doesn't mean necessarily a job. And I think you present a good point. Study could be your full-time job, let's say, but it doesn't mean we don't take action. We don't have hobbies. We don't do work and performance of Tikkun Olam, volunteerism, whatever that might look like. So thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi.
What am I going to get a job? Right.
Thank you.
I just want to remind everyone, for those who are available this evening, Rabbi Jeremy Marquise is teaching on Zoom, his class. And next week, Thursday, Rabbi Jacobs will be back, both for lunch and learn. And also in the evening, there's a Tu B'Shvat Seder and learning a week from this evening, which you should sign up for if you haven't yet and you're interested. It should be a great evening. So there will be a book, but it's also, even if you haven't read the book, it is a full Seder, and there will be a book discussed as part of it, but you don't need to know about the book to go. Everyone should join the Seder if you're available. Good, thank you.
Say what you.
Good. I'm upset to hear. Good.